When it comes to investing, retirement, taxes, healthcare, and estate planning, the decisions you make today can greatly affect the quality of life for you and your loved ones tomorrow. What you need is straight and unbiased information on the most important issues you'll face when planning for your retirement and financial future. Good news, you found Premier Retirement Radio with Jeff Fogan. Jeff is the founder of Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management, and he's been guiding people financially and into retirement for 30 years. So get ready for an hour of the most comprehensive financial information on the radio. Premier Retirement with Jeff Fogan. And now here's Jeff Fogan and Jeff Shade.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Premier Retirement with Jeff Fogan, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. My name is Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions, but the words of wisdom and solid advice, they come from the other Jeff in this radio program. That would be Jeff Fogan, founder and president of Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management. Jeff, how you doing this fine June Saturday?
Wow, it's already June, halfway through the year almost. So, yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah,
always fun to be with you and hang out on the weekend with the listeners.
Yeah, likewise as well, too. Keep cool. Summer here is the time, I think, in this part of the country where maybe there's not as much traffic, but native Arizonans and people who have been here for a long period of time, summer here is sort of like the winter in other parts of the country. You kind of hibernate. Is that not correct?
Yeah, we don't have the snowbirds, so we have the desert rats, right? They just
Right.
head out and try to find cooler weather. But, there's a lot of mountain ranges close. We have our cabin not too far from here, and Mount Lemon's right behind us here in Tucson. And there's a lot of people that, just within a couple hours drive can get to cool country and take a little break from the heat. Or, there's always swimming pools and there's always air conditioning. But, yeah, the winters are so beautiful here. We spend a lot of time outdoors, obviously. And, golfing was a little more fun before it turned to be 100 degrees, but here it is. We'll just have to do it early in the morning.
So I guess if you went out to play golf in the middle of the day, you could play anytime you wanted. It's not crowded, but I guess 7 o'clock in the morning, 6:30, something like that. Is that the time to play golf?
I think any time's a good time to play golf.
Okay.
Back in weather, whatever. I think golfing's good enough to
They say it's
squeeze in no matter what. But yeah, morning's a little bit more tolerable. I don't think you'd die of heat stroke as often.
Well, they say it's dried heat, but still it is. When it's over 100 degrees, it's still hot. Anyway, glad our audience could join us today on Premier Retirement. Jeff, this inflation, these interest rate hikes, this is just getting out of control. I don't know how much longer we're going to have this. The Fed has promised interest rate cuts, but it's just not happening. And as you said, we're less than a month away from halfway through the year. What is affecting these interest rates the way that they are now? And should we be just resigned to the fact that we're not going to have interest rate cuts, that we may even have interest rate hikes?
Well, I think, I was resigned to that even back in October when they said they weren't raising interest rates anymore. I said that inflation problem isn't done. They said, the market still seems to be doing well if we keep on injecting money into the banks, even though we're supposedly quantitative tightening. I don't think they've even pulled $1 trillion out of the market, considering, all the stimulus we've done is just between the last 4 or 5 years into the pandemic, $7 or $8 trillion in, free printed money. And we've only taken less than $1 trillion of it back and raised interest rates on the short term a little bit, as if inflation was supposed to just correct itself. Now, it did a little bit because we got so ahead of ourselves inflation-wise because of all this money printing that at least we didn't add on it, or at least the Fed, the White House and the Fed, they're all in Wall Street, they're all kind of in cahoots, didn't add to the problem, but they somehow assumed that this immaculate reduction of inflation was going to happen. It's not going to happen. It just doesn't just happen. It has to be engineered through things reset, cycles happen. And, I've been mentioning for more than a year about the cycles that we're in and the fact that typically they play out in about 2 years. So we're coming, kind of close to the end of that 2-year cycle, probably in the next 4 to 6 months, where there is typically finishes off with a nice sell-off and recession in the market. However, the government and the Fed has been good at, BSing the market, kind of talking us into believing things that, they know won't happen, but nevertheless, makes people a little bit giddy about the market. Now, there's still a lot of liquidity out there from the standpoint that rich people have made a lot of money in stocks and can continue to hold and buy when the Fed talks. And now they've got a lot of what we call tourist investors, the people that have never really been investors before, jumping on the wagon because it seems to be going the right direction. And there's really no fundamentals backing it. You can pick and choose through the entire stock market. A lot of companies that actually have some good, solid growth with some fundamentals, but they're few and far between. You've got these huge companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Amazon, the Magnificent Seven last year, which has turned into about the Fab Four now. that still seem to be driving the market. They continue to be controlling the universe of tech pretty much, and still in some ways gathering steam, or at least not disappointing from the standpoint of holding their own as far as growth in NVIDIA, especially with earnings. So there are a few bright spots in the market, but honestly, the market has been propped up with kind of fake engineering by claiming interest rates are going to go down, because typically tech does better with lower interest rates because of the borrowing price of money. The interesting thing is, even in the face of 5% interest rates, this market has been able to continue to grow, which means the Fed has not been strong enough in its quantitative tightening. Then a little bit of borrowing, they've issued some bonds. In other words, borrowed back from the investor money. So the government takes in money. They give a bond, which is could be sold, I guess, and liquidated for cash value, but typically those are instruments that are held. But that generates this quantitative tightening thing. It's not like they just go out and gather and take truckloads and pick up loads of dollar bills at the bank and bring them to the Fed and hide them. It's really just engineering with, where they say the money is and where they say it's going. The meantime, while they've been taking out, about $1 trillion, they've been loaning banks trillions of dollars, just in the fact that, they've got this repo fund, which is overnight Fed funds that can be used for the bank's own interest. They've also been loaning the banks money in order to get them out of the horrible pickle they were in early spring last year, when banks were starting to fail because they weren't able to support the interest rates that they promised with bonds, and they didn't hedge. They sold a lot of their credit swaps and different things that they should have done to hedge against the rising interest rates, because I think they thought it was going to be short-lived, and it wasn't. So, the government loaned them a bunch of money. They invested in a bunch of stock, kept it going up. Even though they invested in a lot of their own stocks, overall, the institutions have sold off more stock than they've purchased in the last year and a half. And the evidence is that households own more stock than they've ever owned before. It's in the 60% range, which they've only been close to that twice. Actually, it's been right in that range 2 different times. The last time being the dot-coms right before they bombed. That was because there was so much hype that everybody just believed it and jumped on without any regard to fundamentals, what was happening with the economy, inflation issues, and all these other things. There was just this irrational exuberance, as you remember Greenspan was saying all the time. And that was almost the only thing I remember about Greenspan, irrational exuberance. And he, towed the line pretty good as far as raising interest rates and, shaking off some of that inflationary pressure, but they weren't printing money at the time. They were just hyping the market. Now they're printing the money, then they're hyping the market. So there's all this extra liquidity going into it. They claimed that there was going to be no more rate hikes back in October, November timeframe. The market had been falling for the prior 5 or 6 months before that because, they kept on looking like they had to keep raising rates in order to keep inflation in check and to get it down to that 2% rule, which is kind of their mandate, or at least their goal. I don't know if it's a mandate anymore. They act like it's, well, if it gets there, it gets there. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And we'll just see what happens. So, inflation continued to grow. They said, we're not going to raise interest rates, but because that happened, all of a sudden the market got all psyched and said, oh, good, the market's going to turn around. The economy's going to turn around. They're not going to raise interest rates anymore. But wait, interest rates were 0% just a year and a half before that, or a year or so ago. Now they're 5% or better on the short-term basis. And, any type of a corporate loan is going to be higher than that. So, mortgages are 7% or better, or higher. Not better as in lower, better as in higher. The interest rates are still a problem. Some companies are making money, but most companies aren't. We had the news recently say that, all these companies are having great earnings. Well, a couple of companies do. I remember 2 weeks ago, I think I might have mentioned this last week on the radio, that of the 50 plus companies said that their earnings actually declined from a year ago. Only 30 of the companies, 31 or 32 companies, said that they actually had increased earnings. Of course, that's all the news talks about, is the ones that increased. They forget to tell you that more companies lost money or had decreasing earnings than increasing earnings. We look at all kinds of things economically that don't play out. Manufacturing is down. Inventories are up, meaning that they're not selling products. You got companies like Target selling off real bad from horrible earnings. Shoot, if you can't buy a $5 t-shirt and $6 pants, the economy's getting a little bit tight, at least for the middle and lower class people especially. So again, we have this kind of market that looks like everything's hunky-dory and well and fine, but it really isn't. Interest rates, we were told they were going to continue to go down. The market priced in like 7 interest rate cuts, and we've had none. Now, I've been saying it for 3 or 4 months, as you know, every week on the radio. I said, I don't see it. I don't see how they can. Inflation and real inflation numbers is up over 25% since this problem started, basically since Biden took office. And actually about a year later, before the inflation really started taking hold, that was after additional stimulus that he generated in the aftermath of the COVID. I realized Trump can get credited for a lot of that stimulus as well. That caused some of the inflationary pressures, but was also to try to save the world and, keep us afloat while we were all, stuck in our homes and the economy wasn't really moving there for a minute. So it did, create a little economic boom, but stock market boom, not much of an economic boom. We had a recession, but we bounced out of that. And then with more stimulus, now we've got the inflation problem. And yet there's still more stimulus. If you consider all these programs that Biden's putting in, like, forgiving student loans, infrastructure, all this money is going back into the system, yet they're only taking out a little bit and expect inflation to get under control. So if you look at the last PPI numbers and CPI numbers, which, I think are still out of control, if you look at the actual inflation for the first 4 months of the year, we're up about 4%. Let's just say on the good side, maybe 3.5%. If you times that by 3 times 4 years is 12 years. So if we're on a trajectory right now because we're not continuing to raise interest rates. The Fed hasn't done enough. They know they haven't, but they also don't want to ruin the election. And they want to just give us lip service saying, oh, well, we probably aren't going to lower interest rates, but maybe later, just not right now. And we're data driven. Now, there's a couple of things that'll happen probably if they lower interest rates. As soon as they lower interest rates, I think the market might take that as a hint that, maybe the economics or the market is about to hit the wall and they know that they have to lower interest rates in order not to make it worse than it is. Almost always before the big recession that ends in these roughly 2 year cycles that we're in, the yield curve inversion, economic indicators down, private households owning more stock, all these cycles end in recession historically. And typically that recession starts after the first rate decrease. So I think there's a lot of smart money that knows that. And I think there's a lot of people that are historians that know that. And I think the Fed is really scared to lower interest rates. They know if they do, it might actually be the first domino to start the dominoes from falling and, making this thing about a market correction crash. They don't want to do that right before the election. I'm sure the White House has had several meetings that, hey, you can't mess it up. And typically, if we look at election years, typically the first half of election year is kind of choppy. We didn't really have a lot of chop. We just had a lot of BS saying that it's going to get better, rates are going to go down, inflation's just going to magically fix itself, and everything's going to be hunky-dory fine, and the economy's better than it's ever been because look at all the jobs we're creating. Even though there's not really any jobs created, there's more jobs lost that are high-paying jobs and less jobs, or the jobs that are being created are lower-paying jobs, typically government jobs. We've just got all these different things that are combining and coming together at the same time right before an election. So I think it's going to be hard for the Fed and everybody else to keep this thing afloat. But man, I've seen them defy all odds for so many months that I'm thinking they might actually pull it off till the election. Although we might not have rate decreases, I think they're scared of the message that it will send. I don't think we'll have rate increases because I think they'll be scared of the message that sends, and that is the market might start a sell-off because they know higher interest rates hurt companies and they hurt investors. But at the same time, if they don't do anything, inflation is getting out of control. It's got that big upward trajectory, and the graph is pointing upwards at a faster pace than it has in over a year. And it's going to be back up to 9 or 10% probably by the time the election happens if we keep on this rate of speed of inflation growth. So I think the Fed's in a rock and a hard place. I don't think we're going to see any rate decreases, probably not before the election. I just can't see that happening. I never could see it happening. I still can't see it happening. Inflation has proven that it's not happening. And the Fed finally came out last week and stopped lying to us and said that it's not happening. And then right after that said, but maybe we might, but probably not. So the but maybe we might somehow gave the market enough oomph in the last couple of days. Last week before the holiday weekend, we had kind of light trading last couple of days, with the market bounced off its sell-off. I believe it was on Wednesday when the Fed minutes came out a little earlier than expected. And then, of course, this past week we've seen some resilience in the market again. So I mean, we don't know what the future holds. The market is such a crapshoot. It's just like a casino rolling dice in my mind. If you want to keep rolling the dice because you're on a roll, then good for you. If you can't afford to lose your bet, then, keep some of it or all of it off the table right now. Nevertheless, as far as the interest rates go, you asked the question, why are interest rates where they are? Well, they had to go up. I think the Fed started way too late raising them. They knew inflation was headed their way 2 years ago, not a year and a half ago. I think the first rate cut was about a year. First big rate increase was about a year ago when it all started. When it started hard. Before that was just a couple little tweaky ones. But, they could have started a year earlier knowing that all this extra stimulus was going to cause a problem, and they could have put the brakes on it, but they didn't. So now they're kind of trying to catch up to the train and see if they can slow it down. And I just don't think they've done enough. I think they're going to have to do enough. The fact is, it's got to get worse before it gets better. The cycle's going to correct eventually. If you can afford to be in it and ride it out, great. If you can't afford to it, then be careful. You might want to look at some of the things we're doing to protect assets and, take advantage of the higher interest rates by using better products and better tools that are available to us than has been available to us in the prior few years.
We're talking with Jeff Hogan of Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management here in Tucson and Mesa. We're talking about interest rate hikes and cuts here in our radio program today. We're going to continue that conversation in just a moment. Of course, we have listener questions a little bit later on. But meantime, before we get back to the program, I want to remind our listeners today, Jeff, that we're offering a no-cost, no obligation, no judgment opportunity for people to come in and sit down with you and talk about their retirement portfolio and where they're going with retirement to get the questions answered. Now, it's not going to cost you a dime to have this conversation. I read somewhere about a week ago that more than 40% of Americans say that they have nobody to turn to ask questions about financial items. Well, we're going to solve that right now by offering this opportunity for you to do that with no cost. That telephone number to call to take advantage of this opportunity is 520-780-9059. 520-780-9059. I know it is the weekend, but you can make that call right now if you want. I would encourage you to do that. All you've got to do, leave your name and telephone number. That's it. Shelley will call you back during the week and set up an appointment for you to come in and sit down with Jeff on a one-on-one basis to get your questions answered to help you decide if you're on the right path towards a confident retirement. Again, it's not going to cost you anything whatsoever. Not one thin dime, and of course, there is no obligation. So why wouldn't you take advantage of this opportunity today? 520-780-9059. It's 520-780-9059. You can find out more about us online and request your consultation here at premret.com, premret.com. Jeff, I want to get back to our conversation here about interest rate hikes or cuts. How will the election and who wins this election affect interest rates and a move one way or the other, either interest rate cuts or hikes?
Yeah, it depends if they do the right thing or not. The Fed's kind of in the pocket of who's in the White House. I'm not going to say there wasn't a little bit of manipulation and coercion from the president in the Trump days to the Fed either, because I think the Fed by and large has been kind of a fish that just kind of flips and flops wherever they're told to flip and flop and try to make it. I don't know. They work at the pleasure of the president where they're not supposed to be anywhere tied at all, but they seem to be basically like an appointee of the cabinet almost in my estimation. It's interesting. I don't know how many lies they can tell, and I don't know how the public believes all the BS that comes out of the White House, especially, that economic, what's his name, Jared Bernstein. That guy, he doesn't even know how, what the difference of printing money and borrowing money and, what makes the economy go up or down. He's the one that, changes things on the White House lawn when they give him a brief and says, oh, yeah, well, we've managed to keep inflation in check, and it's wages are higher than ever, and it's like BS after BS. I mean, I don't understand how they can get away with it, but the news stands behind them and makes it sound like everything's all right, and a lot of people believe it. The thing is if they win another term, if the current presidency wins another term, and I don't know if it'll be Biden. I think they're getting a little tired of him and maybe having a new person maybe take his place, or somehow he'll conveniently either become totally incoherent or die or something. I don't know. I don't wish that upon anybody, but I don't know what'll happen. I just don't see them winning with Biden the way the polls are going, the way the economy's going, the way people see things. But if somehow that party gets back into power, I think they'll continue to try to fake and manipulate, print money, and they don't really care. They'll keep taking from the rich and keep raising taxes and do whatever they have to do to probably prop up the market. Even though the market has to correct, it needs to go to better value. Things have to happen. A recession is just really the root word of recession is reset. It's just, I think they correlate. It doesn't, not necessarily the root word, but it's a reset period of time. And it's part of the economic cycle. It always gets a little overheated and it has to cool down. And nobody wants it to cool down. But the fact is it already is cooling down for half of the economy. Anybody that's got to have a second job, anybody that can't afford a house, anybody that's tired of spending 25 to 30% more on gas and food than they were a year ago and can't afford it. Some people say that the best accomplishment for Biden is the fight against obesity. People can't afford food. I don't know if that's the case or not, but the fact is the economy is already slowing. It's not showing up in the stock market. I'm obviously tied to it in the fact that I'm a financial advisor, and we need to take advantage of it when it's there. But it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. It's kind of everybody's going, ooh, wow, look at how nice that is. Look how great the market is. Yet, if you don't have your eyes blinded by all the BS, you see the fact that the market is absolutely naked. There is no, there aren't any clothes. There is no protection here, and it is fake, and we have to be careful. Now, does that mean we can't ride on it and take advantage of all the hype and all the money printing and all the backdoor, fiscal irresponsibility that's happening between the Fed, banks, and other entities that somehow create this fake market trend that's way overvalued historically, and I think has to eventually correct. Again, when you look at a retirement being 10 or 20 or 30 years, hopefully the longer end of that range, a 1 or 2 year stint of trying to figure out the market or just staying safe and just kind of staying out of the way of what is bound to happen is not a bad thing. Sometimes people get a little bit, crazy waiting for this thing to shake out, and they're fear of missing out. They're not getting upside. Well, I think not losing money is pretty dang important in today's economic situation, and just given the fact that you're going to need that money, especially if inflation persists. But as far as, who gets in and how the fiscal policy might change with this coming election, it's hard to say. If Trump gets back in, I think everybody will get excited and probably start investing with probably even careless abandon because it was so good last time, and they're just going to assume it's going to get great. But I'll tell you what, if he does what he needs to do, and that is continue to raise interest rates and try to get inflation under control, some of that'll happen just by becoming energy efficient instead of energy inefficient. There's a lot of things that he can do that would actually fix a lot of those economic woes with true economic good things like increasing our own supply, which is part of the problem. The supply chain getting disrupted with all the extra money means people are willing to pay more for stuff. That's if we get rid of some of that scarceness or the supply issues, that'll help, especially if and energy is a big part of that. So that might help solve some of the problem. But I still think there may have to be some rate hikes, and there might have to be some actual just tough love when it comes to the economy and getting it reset to where it should be, where the valuations come in better than they've been in a long time. What I have seen historically is, it's interesting, the Democratic Party, when they're in power, tend to have reasonably better market experience or market trends than the Republicans. It seems like the Republicans allow cycles to take place and try to fix the problems and get our fundamentals back in order, which typically creates some struggles in the market. But it's typically because of the careless spending and just fiscal irresponsibility of the other party that likes to spend without accountability. Whereas I think the Republicans, by and large, and by the way, I have a hard time liking or loving any political party. I don't want to stereotype them, but typically the Republicans, if you look at when they've been in power, have made fiscal and business policies that are a little bit more conducive to more long-term business health and market strength in the long term, rather than just milking what it can out of it while you're in office. So we might see a little bit of softness. I think we're going to see a crash of softness after the election, no matter what. And I think if Trump wins, I think before he even gets inaugurated, I think the Democratic Party would love to pin a big market crash and a huge recession on him. So I think Katie bar the door. If you're, if you see Trump win in November, they've got a month and a half to kill this market and cause some great damage and leave Trump in a real bad spot when he gets back into office. So, I hate to say that the political gamesmanship is going to be that way, but we've already seen it. I mean, Trump's in court on 8 or 10 different accusations at a time, just right before the election when it could have happened years ago. And they're manipulating this, or they're trying to manipulate this election as best they can, and I'm sure that they're going to manipulate the attitudes of the people toward their successor if it doesn't happen to be themselves.
We're talking with Jeff Hogan of Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management here in Tucson and Mesa. We've been talking about the economy and in particular interest rate hikes or cuts. If Jeff's thoughts resonate with you, you'd like to get in and sit down with him, talk about your individual journey towards a confident retirement. Once again, we're offering a no-cost, no-obligation opportunity to do that. All you've got to do to get it is to call 520-780-9059. It's 520-780-9059. There's no cost. There is no obligation for this. So take advantage of this opportunity. You can do it this weekend. Make that call. Leave your information. That's your name and your telephone number. It'll take you about 60 seconds to do that. Shelley will call you back during the week and set up a convenient time for you to sit down with Jeff. Again, no cost, no obligation for this complimentary retirement roadmap. That telephone number, once again, 520-780-9059. You can also request it online at premret.com, premret.com. Jeff, time for a break. When we come back, we've got listener questions, and later on in the show, we'll talk about whether or not 65 is the ideal retirement age anymore. All that and more when our show continues here on 790 KNST, Tucson's most stimulating talk.
You can't start a trip you've never taken without a plan, and you can't start your retirement journey without a comprehensive plan to get there safely. To request your no-cost Premier Retirement Roadmap, call 580-780-9059 or request it online at premret.com. Now back to more Premier Retirement with Jeff Hogan and Jeff Shade.
Thank you so much for making us a part of your weekend. This is Premier Retirement with Jeff Hogan. My name is Jeff Shade. We're here for you each week for your fiscal fitness and your financial education. As a matter of fact, we're on the radio for you 4 times a week, and those times are Saturday morning at 7 a.m., also 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., and then we're on Sundays at 11 a.m. If you can't listen those times, we're also a podcast. Go to wherever you get the best podcast in the world and search for Premier Retirement with Jeff Hogan. You'll find this show and all of our past shows so you can stay on top of your journey towards a confident retirement. Okay, Jeff, it is time for the listeners to speak. We have 3 listener questions this week, and the first one is Bernie listening to us in Tucson. And Bernie says, I'm over the age of 73. What can I do about avoiding required minimum distributions, RMDs, tax bite? I already have a steady stream of income.
Well, unfortunately, that was the deal you made with the devil years ago when you decided to take a tax deduction on those contributions to that IRA, 401k, or other qualified plan. Nobody thought that when you got to be 70 or 73, you'd be in a higher tax bracket, did they, back then? But now here we are, and you're probably in a higher tax bracket. You've got a steady stream of income, and now the IRS goes, ha, we get you. We get to take 30 of your money now, or whatever it comes out to be, and it's on millions of dollars potentially, instead of maybe just the few $2,000 to $3,000 or $4,000 you were able to save and get that tax deduction on, decades ago. So the government knew what they were doing by developing this plan. It was really kind of endow their own programs for the future. But unfortunately, it comes back to bite many retirees, I would say most retirees today. So, I don't know if you have tens of millions or just $1 million or so, or maybe a few $100,000 in these IRAs, but there's a few different things you can do. They do require charitable gifting, and it's what's on the top of my mind. And that is, if you're already giving, let's say your RMD is supposed to be $8,000, and let's say, you've got good income, maybe you're giving $10,000 a year between church and charities, and you're taking it from your income. I don't know if you're married or single, but you have probably more than, you have 14 to 28,000-ish in standard deduction, a little bit more than that this year. That doesn't even matter if you give money to a charity. It still counts as income. You give it to charity, you still get the big deduction. What if you went straight from your IRA to the charity? And let's say your RMDs were $8,000, but you wanted to give $10,000 to charities. You could give those direct from your IRA to the charity, and it would not come into your house's income. It would not show up on your tax return as income and then buried in the standard deduction. So that might actually allow you to get a little bit more tax deductions than you're getting now. You might actually save a couple of dollars in taxes rather than take those distributions, cause it to be extra income, and just put it in a savings account or some investment account that continues to generate income or dividends that are taxable from here on out. So you basically compound the tax problem that you're in already. Another thing, if you have a large IRA, and I've had people that, have invested in Apple or Amazon or, Microsoft stock 30 years ago in their 401ks, they've got millions and they really don't need their, the distributions. Maybe they have children and grandchildren. You could actually use charitable remainder trusts where you could actually give those distributions to the charity and then leave the bulk of it in a charity and can be distributed over your children's and grandchildren's next generation. It avoids that 10-year forced payout, and you get a little bit of a tax write-off. The kids get long-term income rather than be forced into a higher tax bracket because they have to pull your IRA out, or the remainder of your IRA after you've already had a tax problem. Now that you pass it on to them. And right now it's only a 10-year window that they have to take all the income. On a charitable remainder trust, it's a lot longer than that. It's decades long, and it's 2 generations deep. That you only have to leave the charity 10% of what you end up giving anyway. So There's a lot of things that you could look at that maybe you haven't considered. The other thing is, if you don't want to use charities, here's the other deal. Bite the bullet, get kicked in the gut one big time, and then not worry about it anymore. Maybe just say, it's okay. I know what the highest tax bracket is. If I just pull it out, pay the taxes, and then stick it into something that's tax-free. I like LERPs. Some people do accelerated distributions out of their 401ks or IRAs in order to go into some sort of a life insurance program that's tax-free, and they can leave a death benefit to their children tax-free, and it never shows up on a tax return, even though it might grow at 5 or 6% over the course of your lifetime. Plus, there's a death benefit. If you should get hit by the bus early, you make more than you put in it. Maybe even get you back above the net return of what you would have been able to pass on in your IRAs, gross before taxes. So there are some ways to make it more of a legacy plan if you don't think you'll ever need that money. The other thing is, maybe you still need that money. You just don't know if you're ready to take it yet. Maybe you could pay the taxes on it now, convert to a Roth where you don't have to take the taxes out, but you can always use them for a tax-free income later when you need to just grab a little here and there, or to go on a trip or help a grandkid out or something. Now, keep in mind that any of your heirs are going to only have 10 years to take the distributions from a Roth out as well, but they would be tax-free to the next generation. So it might be wise for you to look at accelerating the tax hit now while we know what the tax brackets are. And they are, in my opinion, probably more reasonable than they will be in the future. So you might want to pay taxes on your terms rather than do what you've already done. And that's just kind of wait until all of a sudden the government says, hey, time to pay taxes on our terms. So again, you can take the bull by the horns, take control into your own hands, and maybe make a better deal out of it. Just a few different options to think about that I mentioned. There's probably a lot more if we dig in deeper and I find out a little bit more about your situation.
Bernie, thank you so much for listening to us in Tucson. We appreciate that question. We'll send you out Jeff's book, Retirement, The Road Ahead. Next question, Jeff, is Beverly listening to us in Oro Valley, and she writes, my mother-in-law is 75, has been married to her husband for almost 20 years. They both have adult children from previous marriages. They're over the age of 70 years old, and for most of their marriage, they have kept separate money accounts. But when they married, he moved into her home, and a few years later, she added him to the deed. They still owe $52,000 on the mortgage and carry a $20,000 HELOC. They both receive Social Security, his being higher, and he also has a pension. Last year, he moved to an assisted living facility. She remains in the home herself, but in poor health. She can barely make her mortgage payment, and her income goes towards the house payment and living expenses, all of her income. Her husband's pension and Social Security goes towards his assisted living facility. She resists the idea of a reverse mortgage. How can I convince her that this may be an answer to her problems?
Well, if that's the only asset she has to draw on in order to pay her bills, then there really isn't a choice. The fact is your mortgage or your reverse mortgage, or just say your home equity, is an asset, just like a bank account is an asset. You could have kept a big mortgage on the house and had $200,000 or $300,000 in CDs perhaps, and then you'd have thought nothing about spending that, and you still have a mortgage. And because you had all that money in the bank, you could still pay maybe a $200,000 or $300,000 mortgage instead of a $52,000 mortgage. Thing is, that $52,000 mortgage is probably the residual of what was a much higher mortgage in the past, and probably has a much higher payment than if you took it out right now. Fact is at your age and health level, I would suspect it'd be very hard to refinance both of those into a mortgage with a lower payment if you wanted to just keep a mortgage on it. But it's really no difference than a reverse mortgage without a payment. A reverse mortgage, they could come in and pay $72,000, pay both of those off. You don't have a payment, and that $72,000, although it grows with interest, your household is going to grow as well. Let's just say, just for the sake of just illustration here, let's say you borrowed, let's say $100,000 on the reverse mortgage. I don't know what your house is worth, but let's just make up a number. Let's say it's worth $500. So you borrow $100 on the reverse mortgage. Let's say that's what you owe after some fees and things. You get a little bit of money out to pay off the mortgages. You got a few extra dollars for savings, and now you've got this mortgage. And let's say it's grown by 7%. So the interest on that loan is $7,000 a year. And let's say your house is worth $5,000, and let's say real estate only grows at 3%. Well, that house is still growing by $15,000 a year if there's a 3% appreciation, which is kind of a typical average long-term rate of growth on real estate. I think that might actually be a little bit low. So if you are still making $15,000 in growth on the value of your home, but the loan interest is only growing by $7,000, even though it's a higher payment, you're still actually netting a growth on your equity. Think about it that way. Just because you have a reverse mortgage on your home doesn't mean when you die, the bank owns it. It just means there's a lien against the home and the equity is still yours or for your family. It could also be that when you get in health to the point that you need assisted living or long-term care as well, you may want to actually sell that house. Guess what? If it has a reverse mortgage on it, so what? You pay off the mortgage and you keep the $400,000 equity. minus the cost of escrow, agent costs or commissions, whatever. So you might still have $350,000 or $400,000 in equity that you could spend on your own care, given that you're not going to need a house. Certainly, you're not going to want to keep up a house if you can't live there. And then you end up going to an assisted living facility or a community center where you can live, have meals prepared for you, and have some of those needs, and somebody to kind of be close to watch over you now that your husband's not there. And I wish him the best and hope things work out. But I get the fact that his pension and Social Security is being used for his own care right now. You've kept things largely separate. Unfortunately, he is on the house, but that doesn't mean, he can't help you reverse mortgage it and use that equity to live on so that you can have a meaningful lifestyle, especially when you think, you might need, you definitely aren't going to need that mortgage and those payments. If something happens to him, you're going to lose your Social Security. If his is higher, you're going to get his. And I don't know if there's a pension program that's going to go to you because it was a second marriage. So, a lot of unanswered questions. I don't have all the information here. However, please don't be afraid of reverse mortgages. They are there for a reason. They do help people that get in a pickle where that's really the last straw. Now, if you had $1 million in savings, I say just pay off these mortgages if the cash flow is a problem. But you don't have that problem. You have a different problem. That is, you've got too many bills for the cash flow that you're taking in, and 2 of those bills could be eliminated very easily, and it wouldn't really cost your heirs probably anything.
Jeff, do we have a relationship with anybody here at Premier Retirement that might be able to help Beverly explain more about reverse mortgages or maybe get that process started?
Well, and amazing you should ask. Jordan in the Mesa office is actually from the mortgage industry, and he's a realtor as well. And that was his background, real estate and mortgage, before he joined me and decided to take over the operations in the Mesa office. But he's still very savvy and still licensed, still carries his license in mortgages. We do help him. And by the way, there's a lot of markup and some leeway for reverse mortgage brokers, I should say, to be a little bit, a little predatory. They know that the people are kind of in dire straits and, are kind of needy and maybe don't have the time to shop around, but they'll add points over and above what the banks that offer these mortgages charge. So, we do them wholesale. We don't charge both sides. We're okay making a fair living, but we don't need to gouge people that are in dire straits. And that was one of the reasons that I helped Jordan renew his license. I said, hey, you got to get that license back because the people that we're sending our clients to are hitting them up with a lot of fees that don't need to be there. They'll say, oh, they're regulatory. No, they're regulatory. In fact, they're charging you the max they can, but they're not necessary. They're not like mandatory. The only thing that's mandatory is some of the cost of classes, an appraisal, and a couple other things. So I'm not the expert, but Jordan is. And if you have any questions, he can give you the numbers. He can shop it around, and he'll broker it to the best company.
Beverly, thanks so much for listening to us, and we encourage you to give us a call here and get in touch with Jordan to talk about that reverse mortgage. 520-780-9059 is our number. Once again, 520-780-9059, and we'll be sending you out Jeff's book, Retirement: The Road Ahead. Next question, Jeff, is Bill listening to us in Rita Ranch, and Bill says, I was left $200,000 in an IRA beneficiary distribution account when my father passed. I have 10 years to withdraw the money. I'm at the 35% federal tax rate currently and plan to make a similar annual income over the next 10 years. Taking the money out in one large sum would not change my federal tax rate, but neither would taking it out over 10 years. Is there a benefit to keeping this money in the IRA versus withdrawing now, paying the taxes, and then using it to invest in other financial instruments?
Well, I appreciate your smart thinking on this, Bill. There is no reason to keep it, and I'll tell you 2 reasons why. One is you're in the 35% tax bracket now. You're going to be in the same bracket forever. You might as well pay taxes now at your current level. And by the way, we know that in 2 years, that bracket goes up by 3 or 4%. So we know it's going back up after unless Trump gets in and renews the tax breaks. But here it is. I mean, wouldn't you rather pay tax at the lowest possible level you can? Because I'm sure that 35% tax bracket isn't going down based on what you just said. You're making a good living. If you're still working and going to work another 10 years, or maybe you're not working, but you have a lot of pension and investment income, or maybe you're a day trader, you've got some rental properties that's just generating a bunch of cash, and you're in that $400,000 or $500,000 range, taxable range, where you'd be hitting those brackets. I mean, obviously you're doing well. I'm guessing that like most people, you might not be spending all of your income. So of course, when a third of it goes to taxes, it's a little easier to do. But you might want to consider putting paying taxes on that $200,000. Obviously, you could do that with the income, the after-tax income that you're earning, or probably have some savings laying around. Given that income, I'm sure your lifestyle is such that you'd have some investments that you could pay taxes pretty easy with that money. In addition to that, I would consider a LERP. You're probably young enough, if you're still working for that long, if you're in good enough shape, consider sheltering that money and never paying taxes again. Pay taxes on it now, never pay tax again, and you might even want to add $100,000 or $200,000 a year to it for the next few years, and maybe you have a tax-free bank account worth a couple of $1 million that you can borrow money out of anytime you need it without it causing you an extra tax, without it showing up on your as a 1099 as an income. It'll never show up on your tax return. LURPS, using life insurance as a tax shelter is what wealthy people do. They get a lot of flack. Wealthy people get a lot of flack. Billionaires, multimillionaires, they never pay taxes. Well, right, they use all the tricks. I don't know if you're a multimillionaire or billionaire, but you make a good living, you might want to use the same tricks that rich people do. And that is to shelter your taxes in assets that are principal protected, make a reasonable rate of return, typically better than bonds, and allow you access to your money tax-free. And if you die, or when you die, I think we're all going to do that, right? That money, whatever's left in the account that you haven't used, would go to your heirs tax-free. And it does grow at a really good rate. I mean, it blows away. Historically, it blows away municipal bonds, which is another tax-free growth asset. However, the IRS knows about it. They know it's considered provisional income. It doesn't help you in any way other than, give you a federal tax break and possibly a state one. LURPS, a lot more all-encompassing when it comes to comprehensive tax planning. I would definitely consider that. And but even if you don't, I would definitely consider, yes, pay taxes now on your terms when you know it's probably the lowest tax bracket you're going to be in for the next 10 years.
Bill, we appreciate that question and listening to us. And of course, we'll send you out Jeff Spoke Retirement, the road ahead. If you've got a question you'd like us to answer on the air, you can get it to us two ways, basically. You can call it in to 520-780-9059 if you wish and dictate it to Shelley. But I think the best way to do it is to go to premret.com, PREMRET.com. Go to the contact page there and send us that question. If we use it on the air, not only will you get a good answer, but you will also get Jeff Spoke Retirement, the road ahead. Once again, it's premret.com, PREMRET.com. You're listening to Premier Retirement with Jeff Ogan, founder and president of Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management. Once again, before we continue the show, I want to remind you that if you would like to get your questions answered about retirement, you don't have anybody to turn to for retirement advice, well, we've got the answer for you right here. It's Jeff Ogan at Premier Retirement. You can get in to talk to Jeff, no cost, no obligation whatsoever, totally informational consultation by calling 520-780-9059. Again, no cost for this whatsoever. Make that call right now. Even though it is the weekend, you can leave your name and your telephone number. It'll take you less than 60 seconds to do that. Shelley will call you back on Monday and set up that appointment for you. Once again, 520-780-9059. Request this complimentary Premier Retirement Roadmap. No cost, no obligation. It's not going to cost you a dime. And remember, this one call really could make all the difference. Jeff, for a lot of people, 65 seems to be a magic number. It represents the year that many people decide to retire, yet it's just that, an age that works for some people. So in this segment, I want to talk a little bit about why age 65 was picked for this ideal retirement age, and maybe some of the reasons that someone may not want to wait until 65. So how did this 65 become the ideal retirement age?
Well, I don't know. I think it has a lot to do with Social Security and Medicare. Probably Medicare mostly, because Social Security now has the full retirement age, really is 67 for most people that are coming up on retirement soon, or somewhere between 66 and 67 for people that are retiring currently. And that is full retirement, meaning that's when you can collect your Social Security, continue to work without, any reductions to your benefits and so forth. If you're 65 and retire, and ready to take Social Security, you'll take a little penalty from the standpoint of, you get 2 extra years of payout, but you do take about a 10 or 12% hit in the actual paycheck size. Does that make sense? Well, maybe it does for some people. But I think 65, the main reason people wait to 65 is just because of the cost of insurance. And Medicare is a really good insurance if you consider it to most plans out there. I know some people have government benefits and some insurance that beats everything. But, Medicare is pretty good. There are some deductibles, very low cost. I mean, if you didn't have a supplement or an Advantage plan and all you did is pay the amount over and above what a Medicare doctor receives as his assignment for the care, even if they overcharge, they're limited on that. Even if you didn't pay a dime out of pocket other than just, what you have to pay for the Social Security benefit in and of itself, which comes out of your Social Security, it's about $170 a year, or a month rather. That could go up with inflation. It goes up from time to time, and it actually went down a little bit, I think, last year or the year before. But bottom line, there is a cost to it. But if you consider the cost and benefit, it's really good insurance. If you want to add an extra, $100, $120 a month to that, you can get a supplement that covers every deductible, known to man. So, that could possibly happen. Well, I shouldn't say that all encompassing, but pretty darn close. So if you can get insurance for that, but if you were to retire at 63 and had 2 years where you had to pay like I do, like $1,800 to $2,000 a month for zero help, zero help with deductibles, like a $12,000 per person deductible. That's the best I can get. Of course, it's means tested. I'm, self-employed with a small organization. I don't have hundreds of employees where I can go out to Blue Cross or Aetna or somebody and get this big group plan. So I basically am resigned to go on the exchange for my insurance. So if you're retired and don't have an employer, you're going to be doing the same thing, going out on the exchange. It's going to be means tested. If you have a good lifestyle and you're making $300,000 or $400,000 a year, or even $150,000 to $200,000, you might be paying over $1,000 per person just for insurance. So, is that going to cut into your retirement savings too much to make it worth retiring sooner? Well, maybe not. If you've got maybe a government plan or you're in the military, you might have VA benefits that could cover most of those costs, or maybe give you some sort of a TRICARE for Life type plan. If you've heard of those, they're pretty darn good. But I think the main reason people want to wait till 65 is probably the biggest single check that they will write per month, unless they have a fat mortgage or a payment on a Ferrari or something, is going to be their health insurance. And that I think is probably the biggest reason people get a little bit worried. Now, there's a lot of people that retire earlier than 65 because they've got a younger spouse that's still going to work for a while, at least get them to 65. Then they can decide if maybe one spouse doesn't work to age 65 and it's a little cheaper to pay for one than two. Again, it depends on your age, depends on your financial wherewithal, the ability to, turn your savings and investments into income that's reliable, predictable, and even guaranteed where possible over and above that Social Security. Because I think you have to look at also the status and the health of the Social Security system in and of itself. The government's really good at printing money. They're good at, finding ways to, continue to pay Social Security in spite of the fact that the trust fund continues to get lower. Now for the last 4 or 5 years, it's actually shrinking instead of growing like it was up to just a little while ago. It's expected to be broke in less than 10 years from now. So if that's the case, are they going to continue to give full benefits? Are they going to just raise the taxes to employers? That would make employers maybe be less apt to hire people. That might cause a big problem in a recession because less hiring. It could cause a lot of people say, well, there's no incentive to work if I've got to pay 40% in taxes and another 15% out of my own pocket to Social Security so I can have a paycheck when I retire. Maybe I'll just retire early and forget this and just try to milk what they can out of Social Security. So I don't know what the health and the status in the future is going to be. I don't believe that they'll quit paying payments to those who need it, but I think there's going to be a means test somehow where those Social Security payments may be a little less than predictable or guaranteed. They might be predictable, but maybe not guaranteed. I think, when you build a plan, we have to make sure that we don't overemphasize things that we can't control. I think we'll be a lot more in control of our own money, the deals that we can make with our own pensions, our personal pensions that we can do through annuities, through maybe laddered bond programs, even laddered CDs right now, if you can get them long enough to make sense, with some sort of a fixed rate of return, which is better than we've had in the past decade or two, and be able to live on some sort of a predictable rate of return and income, and still being smart with your money, not risking too much to where you'd be derailed. Now, obviously, the sooner you retire and the closer to 50 rather than 65 or 70 that you retire, the more years you're going to have to rely on that income. So it would require, in my opinion, maybe even considering less risk, more long-term guarantees, because it doesn't take more than a couple of big market corrections during your retirement life to derail a retirement plan if you have too much of it at risk and if you're needing those dollars that are at risk to live on. I've told you the story about Norm, how many times? A lot of times. It's in the book. Many of you have heard it. He had $1 million when he retired back in 1999, and because the market crashed right after he retired, he never recovered from it. 10 years later, he's almost broke, wondering, how am I going to do this? I've had to get part-time jobs, take Social Security early, and my $1 million is gone. That wasn't supposed to happen. The market average is 10. Why didn't it work for me? Because he had his entire retirement at risk in a market, something that he can't control. So again, I think it depends on how you structure retirement, how well you can live within your means, how much buffer you build into it for inflation and other things that might happen in the future, where we got pretty used to 2 or 3% or less inflation for the last couple of decades. And then all of a sudden now was shooting up towards a 10% annualized rate last year. And it's still in the 3 to 5 range now. It's not lower than that. It's actually higher than what they're reporting. We've got, the CPI coming out a couple of weeks ago. Remember, I mentioned that, because the food component was causing it to go up a little higher than they wanted, they took coffee, which had gone up 78% since last year. They took coffee out of the equation. If you keep moving the goalposts, it's pretty hard to figure out where to kick it. But if you keep moving the goalposts, have a different story. We don't even know what's really happening. So again, you need to plan for some buffer. You need to plan for some what ifs. You need to plan for years of non-performance. You have to plan for, at least for income, that'll replace those paychecks you're so used to receiving up till that age 65. But again, the younger you retire, I think the more cautious you need to be, because if you retire in your 50s, you only work for 30 years, but you want to retire for 50, you're putting more stress on your retirement plan than you put in your working years.
If you have questions about when you can retire, or maybe you're already in retirement, you want some questions answered, once again, call Jeff at 520-780-9059 and request your no-cost, no-obligation retirement review, a retirement roadmap, if you will. Once again, that telephone number, 520-780-9059. Jeff, out of time for this week. I want to thank you for your time, but most of all, I want to thank our fine listeners here in the greater Tucson area. For Jeff Hogan, I'm Jeff Shade. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll talk to you again next week with another edition of Premier Retirement right here on 790 KNST, Tucson's most stimulating talk.
Investment advisory services provided through Premier Wealth Advisors, LLC, an Arizona state-registered investment advisor. Securities transactions are placed through TD Ameritrade. Insurance and annuity products are offered through Premier Advantage Inc., DBA Premier Retirement Planning and Wealth Management. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any reference to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims paying abilities of the insurance carrier. This show is intended for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as advice or recommendation. Due to show format, accuracy, and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Premier Retirement and its representatives do not provide legal or tax advice and may only conduct business with residents of states and jurisdictions where they're properly registered.